Alexandrian Codex. I'm Alex. This is Star Trek New Horizons mod for Stellaris. We are playing as the Borg Collective, and we've just eaten the Crenum Imperium. We are rebuilding, we're building, incorporating the new systems, and plotting annexation of the Prelor Auxiliary. Already making upgrades to our fleets, which are probably going to be prohibitively expensive to do. Reinforced cutting beams are really fucking good. Like, anti-photon beams are... The reduced hull damage just sucks. This gives shield penetration and armor damage. This gives less armor damage, same amount of shield penetration. Why would I not just use a cutting beam? What am I not saying here? Accuracy? Alright, it's more accurate. It has tracking. It's closer range. And it's way less damage. Its refire rate is better. So it has some appeal, but just not much appeal to me. This is good against everything except shields. This sucks against shields, and that's it. Probe exterior is the best we can be using. Yeah, or Renthi secured. This gives hull points. What do you get? Armor points. I'd rather have adaptive armor, frankly, because armor... Losing armor, less terrifying than losing hull. Hull damage... Tactical station's actually quite tempting. We already have a lot of armor and shield penetration, but building more on top of that... Nah, let's just go for straight up EPS manifold weapon damage. This gives tracking, same amount of tracking. Nope, I'm fine with that. Alcote Bay 2 is a thing that will increase our hull and armor regen by a 25% bonus, which is pretty significant. 10% faster warp jump speeds, or warp speeds. Better... What did that improve? Chance to hit, tracking, weapon damage, and ship hull points. That's... Oh my god, this is too good. So these are even more expensive now, but all the same, even better. Let's plop down the same improvements here. That's it, right? No, wrong. Boom, 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 boom. Dedicated antimatter pylons, rather than cutting beam turrets. Cutting beam turrets do shield and armor damage. Don't you show me obsolete components, because I bet you they're not fucking obsolete. Average damage of 1.02, but they have 50% shield penetration, 75% armor damage, whereas this only has 25% armor damage. These antimatter pylons fucking suck. I ain't using them. I'm not switching to those. That is a bad time. How do we have so much power? Good God, the power generation on these ships is insane. This is a plexus pyramid. Okay, this is a nanite pyramid, so let's change that right off the bat. Give you better adaptive armor. Switch these out. Again, we're keeping the cutting lasers. These are totally fine. Just make sure these are actually upgrading and not just changing the image, so nanite saved. Last but not least, cutting pyramid, which is everything the game's trying to default us to. Did I upgrade that alcove beam on the nanite? I believe that I did, but now that I'm mentioning it, I may not have, so let's save that. Nanite. You don't have a better alcove. Good thing I checked. You switch to nanite projectors, everything else here is fine. This is going to be very expensive to upgrade, isn't it? Yeah, pretty expensive, but go ahead and upgrade. Renthi secured, 1 specimen collected, 250 society output. More importantly, we get unity, not a lot, society, and research. The vessel is now ready to survey, which I will delightedly send into there. Hello? Ooh, demon class preference! Photicians. You are highly talented, strong, you have a demon preference, you're repugnant, decadent, untrustworthy? Photician. Interesting. I don't remember you. Are you actually from Star Trek? Photician. Well, the only places I'm seeing it mentioned are the Stellaris subreddit, so maybe, maybe not. all the same, they're in the Hague system, quite a ways away, but how big is this planet? It's small, right? Ah, but it's a demon-class planet. Well, no. Them being turned into Borg will mean we can uplift them, move them away, no problem. The only difficulty is we need to move so that we have this in our sphere of control. We wanted to move down to the Hirogen anyway, so while problematic, this is something that we wanted to do anyway. And that's an important thing to remind myself. Construction ships, let's make sure you are the absolute cheapest I can make. Cost of 10. Cost of 10. Cost of 10 for, well, I guess it doesn't matter. And this is a cost of 30. Do they get any cheaper than that? They do not. There we go. Fastest assemblers. And while I'm at it, let's go ahead and take a look at our survey ships, making sure these are the fastest and best things we can possibly be fielding. Done. So Unicomplex, give me 2 construction ships. And we'll just start walking our way down here to incorporate the Hague system and its wonderful inhabitants. Yeah, no, that's an easy enough reminder. Transport fleet, I actually want you to stay... I mean, you don't have to stay in Crinum. Why don't you move down to Omega? But I have a feeling we're going to move on to Praetor Auxiliary before we expand all the way down here. Just hunch. Geneth. I could be upgrading these, but I'm already building a fuck ton. So nah. Same thing here. These could have facilities on them. I really want the synthetic dilithium manufactory, but 3 of these would already put me in a bad place. Alright, you're down in Chorus. Just keep on surveying. The Hirogen would be very easy to take out, but again, we need to move our borders down here so we can not have infinite pirate problems. We already have 26%. Yeah, they do have a few unique bad things. Sorry for not looking at chat more. The Borg do have a civil war thing that can happen to them. They also have the Undine Species 8472 invasion. But normally at that point in the game you're so strong it's not a problem. The Borg Civil War I remember used to be worse than it is now. I think is generally the feedback people have given about it. I'm not asking for it to be buffed, I'm just reporting what I've heard. Yeah, we should close in the gaps up here before proceeding south. They probably won't become spacefaring anytime soon. Higher difficulty might still be worth it. Yeah, maybe. Honestly, in Stellaris and in most Paradox games, I find higher difficulty, and I've talked about this before, off-putting, because it doesn't actually make the AI any better. It just gives the AI so many bonuses that it does better. It's like... it's privilege, right? It doesn't make them any smarter. It just gives them better access to opportunities by giving them better access to resources. The AI might actually be, well, is actually worse than the player all the time in pretty much every way. And it's compensated for not by making it smarter or adaptive or having some gradient to that, but instead just by giving it good stuff. I hate that. Galactic Civilization's difficulty rating is what I talk about a lot when I start ranting about what it should be like. Because Galciv was unrelentingly hard if you set it to be that difficult, but it was also stupidly easy if you wanted it to be. And that sort of modular, granular difficulty was really appealing to me for a lot of reasons. Because it felt like it would actually learn from you, and learn from your strategies and what kinds of tactics you preferred using and ship builds you like building. Whereas in Stellaris, the AI never, to my knowledge, they don't really try to build to counter you. Their fleet compositions are static for the most part. Which is boring and Sad. Not to hate unnecessarily. That's why I like increasing difficulty in ways that don't involve giving the AI more bonuses. Like playing the United Federation planets. The handicap there is playing a pacifist species and role-playing them in the inefficient, slow, non-confrontational, non-military focused way that the in-canon civilization might play. When I play on my own, I'll often play very pacifistic, non-aggressive species, and I'll let the AI expand and just kind of stay out of their way, so that they'll get bigger on their own, and it sets me up against a better challenge. The same sort of appeal that I think my favorite part of any game is probably the mid-game. And the mid-game in Stellaris is the thing that has taken the most flack when from the release the fucking game to now. The mid-game of Stellaris kinda sucks. Like, it's a lot better than it used to be, but it really sucked. It really sucked when Stellaris first came out. Early game, you're exploring, you're colonizing, you're meeting all these people and plotting and coming up with all these ideas how you're going to interact with these weird species. Then you're starting to develop your planets, making new kinds of ships, and then the borders solidify and you move over to just attacking people. And once you are successful in attacking someone, the diplomacy is so inert and non-responsive to mutual threats or the player, and the AI doesn't think very diplomatically or tactfully. It doesn't think, really, so it doesn't respond to you becoming a major power by forming coalitions against you. Meaningful coalitions against you, anyway. And it just kind of... it spirals and quits being fun. Then you hit late game, and the challenge to the player that the devs introduced was, well, if we can't make the existing civilizations any better, let's introduce special civilizations that are just like super high tech and have massive fleets, and that'll be really hard for the players to fight because they're like real imbalanced. Yeah, that's fun. Artificial difficulty when the AI can't handle its advantages properly, and the advantages just kind of work as a handicap to keep it from being as terrible as it is? Nah, man. Like, the endgame crises are not fun in Stellaris. They're fun like the first time you run into them because it's novel. But really after the second time of encountering the goddamn swarm or the old AI invasion, which was a bitch to get to fire off, or the trans-dimensional invasion or whatever else, it's just and the Great Khan is awful. Like, interesting in that it creates something that you might not be able to take on head to head, and something you have to kind of play around with diplomatically and wait for the right moment to strike. Interesting, but again, it's creating difficulty out of nothing. They're not a potent adversary because they're capable. They're a potent adversary because they are privileged, because they are given buffs and bonuses to make them unfairly good. Powerful in a way that you cannot reasonably or even unreasonably be expected to build up to that level on your own. It's just like, it doesn't feel very clever or nuanced, or I don't know, it feels very hit the player with a hammer kind of thing. Isn't this fun? Nah, not really. Fun would be playing in a living universe where other civilizations respond dynamically to intergalactic politics, where you have something like the Space UN from Galactic Civilizations making politics and alliances a thing, restricting what technologies you can have, what buildings you can have, what resources are tradable, and who can have what, and creating demilitarized zones, or creating forced non-aggression pacts and stuff like that, and even as a very hyper-aggressive species if you have the weight of, if I break the Geneva Convention, for example, everyone else will fuck me over. Creates a really interesting period of political intrigue. Like the 20th century, the political intrigue and politicking, really, between nation states has largely been as a consequence of the creation of these international power blocks, like NATO and the Warsaw Pact and the United Nations. Now, of course, alliances existed like that before the modern era, but the interconnectivity of civilizations, the advancement of communications and travel technology made it even more possible to have a single authoritative body that doesn't have exactly immediate impending control over everyone, but just enough to keep everybody in line. And my point is, if you have faster than light travel and faster than light communications in a galactic setting with multiple species, even if some of these species are rogue servitors or gestalt intelligences or hive minds or whatever, they're going to have to participate in that larger community or be destroyed. Look at Mass Effect for setting handling that really well. Like, no one really likes the Council, but they want to be a part of the Council because they wanted a seat at the table to fuck everybody else over. That's what I'm about. That's what I want. I want some goddamn diplomacy in this 4X game that's not trash. I don't want espionage. Fuck espionage. It's stupid, and there's no good way to implement it, and no 4X game has ever had good espionage. Even in Civilization, it's either garbage and annoying, or it's just not fun. What I want is diplomacy, because why the hell are there other nations to interact with if it's a shallow, unrewarding, linear, repetitive task? Soapbox is gone. We're getting interlinked computational arrays. I'm moving on. This is the problem playing hundreds and thousands of hours of different franchises. You get very adamant opinions about things. And I absolutely understand. It's not like you can just enter a line of code for make AI better or make diplomacy a thing in the game, but Titans were more important put in the game? Were they? Really? Really? Fucking Titans, and we put in another endgame crisis and a mid-game crisis, and I don't want the shitty patches. I don't want tiny little dog treats. I want a substantial overhaul of a core mechanic to make it fun. Now, to Wiz's credit, and to the credit of the team, the work that they're doing right now to overhaul planetary mechanics looks so good. I cannot tell you, after running that last campaign and managing, what, like 150 something planets, how exciting it is for me to think about, oh man, if I did that campaign again, I wouldn't have to spend 28 fucking hours just micromanaging planets. I'm super hyped for that. Hopefully they can get around to fixing diplomacy or addressing diplomacy in a meaningful, deep, compelling, interesting, story-driven manner. But we'll see. We have found the Benians. They are of no concern to us. Alright, now, for real, Soapbox is gone. I wouldn't get so emphatic if I didn't like the game. I wouldn't get riled up or passionate or however you want to describe it, bitchy, contemplative, whatever else, if I didn't care. The fact that I care speaks volumes about the quality of the product and the consistent that I'm around despite my complaints. Means that I genuinely believe that the development team cares enough about the product to make important changes, to make the game more enjoyable. Now, it's been a very unpopular decision to switch over to just one form of FTL travel, but if that makes the development process for them easier and balancing for them easier, it's fine, it's understandable. It certainly made Warfare a lot more easy to balance. They could have gone full Sword of the Stars and given every race a different faster than light travel mechanism, but that only worked in Sword of the Stars because they were each distinct but still had enough overlap. And you couldn't create your own species, right? There were only humans, hivers, Lear, Morigi, Tarkassians. Fuck. Lizard monkeys, humans, insects, bird people, dolphins. Who were the Zool, and is that it? Was there 6? I thought there were 8. Sword of the Stars 2 added some weird robot race that really wasn't that fun to play. 7 or 8, something like that. But each of them had a slightly different way that they traveled in space, and that was a lot of fun. Ooh. Are you going to make good drones? Well, you're intelligent, so yeah. Stellaris isn't that refined of an experience. It's not just 6 species. A lot of the appeal, initially, when they made the game, and still an important part of the experience, is creating the species you want to play, or creating the experience you want to play. And if there were even 3 FTL methods, while that did increase playability, balancing the 3 around each other when every system was randomly generated, very, very hard to do. It's really worth emphasizing in Sword of the Stars, which is, to my knowledge, the only franchise that has done multiple FTL types well. They only had pre-generated maps. They were not randomly generated maps. No, that's not true. They did have randomly generated maps, but they generally followed a pretty distinct formula, that so they played out more or less the same. If you had, yeah, that it was more or less balanced. The Hivers were bullshit. They were really slow. They had no FTL drives except giant gates they constructed in every system, or you could construct via ships, so you had to slowly, over the course of years, move from star to star. So if somebody was already entrenched there, you were in a bad situation. You had to create a massive fleet and just send it all at once, and for months and months of in-game time, just wait, is it an inch closer, an inch closer, an inch closer, and if you got attacked in that time, you were fucked. But if you got a foothold and put up a gate, you could then reinforce from all of your other worlds to that one point instantaneously through the gate. So fighting as the Hivers was a bitch to move forward, but I'm writing down that I want to stream this game or record it now because it's been long enough and I really like it. Sword of the Stars 2 sucked ass. It was published by Paradox, but it was not made by Paradox. It was rushed in development and they lied about a lot of things. It's kind of a shame, but Sword of the Stars was a great game. Really, the most boring nation was the one that used the equivalents of hyperdrives, the Tarkassian Union. Dragon, monkey-looking people, wizard folk. They were cool and regal and had some nice aesthetic to them. Had very silly sounding voices, too. Yes, Hakona. Sounded oddly sexual, or at least sensual every time they talked. It was very uncomfortable. The Lear were my favorite to play. The Lear used stutter warp drives. Stutter warp drives. See, this is what makes a good fucking game, is I'm talking about it years later, and I'm still excited by these interesting, nuanced little differences between the things. But if I talked about a game of Stellaris, not New Horizons. New Horizons, there's enough interesting mechanics between the two that keeps you engaged. It's not that interesting that a machine empire can build pops, but moves around and has armies more or less exactly the same as every civilization. It's not interesting that you can go down, becoming cyborgs, or becoming psychic, or biologically engineering your people. Why not all 3? Like, it's the choices in Stellaris are shallowly interesting, shallowly divergent, allowing players to create their own races. Gutted one of the core things that really sets 4X games apart from each other. Now, Stellaris didn't set down to be a 4X experience. Stellaris sat down intending to be a grand strategy game set in space. And I don't know. Grand strategy works great for history or alt history, but this has needed a lot of work. Stellaris has gotten a lot better, but when it was new, it was flashy, and it made a lot of promises it never lived up to, but it just wasn't what I expected it to be, and I feel like a lot of people felt that way. If you look back at the subreddit in those early days and posts, or on the Facebook page or on the Paradox forums, people asking if they should buy the game, a lot of comments were like, come back in 6 months, come back in a year. Most Paradox titles get better, and this one needs a lot of work. And even now that it's been out a significant period of time, it still needs a lot of love in the diplomacy department. But yeah, like in Sword of the Stars, every species had a different likelihood to gain access to different technologies every game. In Sword of the Stars 2, it was taken to an extreme that was kind of ridiculous and wasn't necessarily fun, but or easily understood and poorly tutorialized. But in SOTS 1, hey, Alexander, that's a good looking system right there. Like, humans were not very likely to get AI, but the Morigi and the Lear were very likely to be able to find AI. Researching AI could either go really well, or if you weren't careful about it, would rip your empire in half and spawn an AI rebellion. With very little warning. It would just spontaneously rip in half and be like, yo, you fucked up. You should have had these under better control, but instead you dicked around and now you gotta pay for it. The Hivers, I think, were really unlikely to get AI. Really, competitively in multiplayer, at least playing in local multiplayer with friends in college, I think the most effective strategy we came up with was play the Lear, or the Morigi, probably the Lear though, rush AI, hope to God you don't fall apart. After you get AI, your ability to research everything else is drastically cheaper. The ships you're able to build are drastically better. Your industrial output and everything else is phenomenally better. And then you just wipe everybody else out who don't have AI. AI became necessary and integral to being competitive. But basically, that meant that in a multiplayer game, not only was there a correct build order, which is something I normally rebel against in 4X games, and I talked about that when we played Endless Space, how annoying that can be to me, especially in games like Civilization. But it had a correct build order that was basically, alright, everybody else is being careful and just building it up, but basically you're playing Russian roulette. You're either gonna shoot yourself in the head and fucking die, or you're gonna shoot yourself with a magic bullet and turn into a god. It's like a 60-40 chance, 70-30 chance, you're probably going to be a god, but there's also a chance you're just going to be wiped out of this game. It's going to be your fault, nobody else's. Nobody's making you make that choice, but it's a choice if you want to make it. That's super cool! And then you contrast that with Stellaris, and you have dangerous technologies that aren't fucking dangerous. The androids, when the game first came out, were dangerous because they were necessary for the machine rebellion to happen. They're not anymore. They're not dangerous at all. The jump drive tech was dangerous. That's how you got the Unbidden to show up. But the Unbidden had been changed and the FTL has been changed, so jump drive isn't even all that good anymore. And although it's dangerous, it's not literally rip your empire in half dangerous. It's, oh no, there's an endgame crisis you'll have to fight against, but you're already snowballing out of control. The Sword of the Stars mechanics punished you for doing well and risking it. Like, Okay, you want to go out on a limb and put yourself in danger? Sure. If you fuck up, everything you've built will be turned against you. You cool with that? That's a really cool premise. That's the sort of thing I'm talking about when I'm talking about make your AI smarter. Make your endgame crises more clever. Don't just make them bigger, badder, tougher, better buffs, better numbers, bigger ships, more whatever. Make them cleverly, make them intelligently, make them fun and challenging, make them optional, completely avoidable, completely something you have to subject yourself to even, because that makes it the sense of agency and exploration and the ownership a character feels when they subject themselves to that, when they decide to roll the dice, is a lot more fun than the game saying, by the year 2300, the dice will roll. If you research jump drives, it will likely land on a 5 or a 6, being the unbidden. If you don't, it might land on a 4 or a 3, or it'll probably land on a 4 or a 3, being the fucking swarm. And if it doesn't land on that, and you've researched AI tech, well then it'll be the AI rebellion, being 6-sided dice is too big for this, but you take my point. It's not like it's avoidable to have an in-game crisis. It will happen. And it has nothing to do with what you do or don't do, and that's... The Awakening Fallen Empires is... if it happened in a Babylon 5 kind of way, where they were so totally beyond you, you could not possibly stand up against them, and you had to pick a side, that would be interesting. But again, the game capitulates and compromises, and it doesn't take it to the pretty crazy extreme that a show like Babylon 5 did. Instead, it's just like, yeah, okay, so they're awake, and they'll start building ships again, and they're more advanced than you, but if you build your ships one specific way, you'll be able to take them out if you've been planning on it this whole time. But if it's a roll of the dice, if they exist in the first place, if they are intentionally obfuscated or hidden from the players, if every time the players have come near, their scout ships have been destroyed, rather than just like, you are not allowed in our space. If they're blown up, if there are acts of sabotage or influence or infiltration undertaken by these old empires, if their technology really is Lovecraftianly different than the empires that you have access to as a player, that makes it so much more interesting. And even more so if you couldn't see their ship composition before going to war with them. If their ships were kept a complete fucking mystery and were pulled from a table. Now, I know that's kind of how it works, but generally they all build their ships more or less the same, or at least used to. There's my large point here. My wide point, maybe. Broad point, that's the right word. There is a wealth, a vast and rich wealth of impressive, innovative, exciting, creative, brilliant works of art in the form of existing 4X games and intellectual properties. Stand on the shoulder of giants. Go borrow shit. Unapologetically borrow shit. See what make games good and do it. Don't half-ass do it like a lot of Stellaris, like, well, this feels similarly, or, you know, this is sort of like that. No, like, just go for it. Do something creative, do something different, because if you just go for the middle way, if you just walk a very moderate line, you create a product that's, Like, for me, Stellaris isn't even enjoyable anymore unless I'm playing a mod that adds content and context to it. It is not immersive or fun to play as a bunch of nameless jackass empires whose cultures come down to, like, a dichotomy between pacifism, militarism, authoritarianism, and populism, materialism and spiritualism, which is fucking stupid, and xenophilism and xenophobia. Just it's an interesting praxis. It's an interesting grid to try to place different civilizations on. But it doesn't feel super organic. It just feels like I identify as 1. If you identify as 2, I do not like you. That's it. That's all the complication there is there. There's no nuance to the attitudes. Or at least the nuance to the attitudes and the flavor and color of different races and what makes them special and different and exciting to play as, like the difference between the Klingons and the humans, or the Xindi and the humans, or the Borg and the Cardassians, or the Romulans and the Dominion. Small differences, but notable and developed enough that they're compelling. It's not just good game mechanics, but also good writing. It's good writing, it's good world building, and it lends itself very neatly, very tidily to not tidal-y, very cleanly and neatly, I should say, to fun interactions and compelling interactions and great stories, because we all have shared ideas about who are the Borg, and what is the United Federation of Planets, or what is the Rebellion, or what is the Empire. Our experiences in those universes are all the more compelling and exciting for us because we're able to participate in a larger story that's outside of our own experience. But when our own experience defines the setting, when I'm the only one who can tell the difference between insert random name generator for government type, and, you know, etc, etc, etc. They don't have any soul or heart or spirit to them. They're just like cute little animated images that don't feel or play very differently. The ways that they do play differently, I'll be real with you, I hate hive minds. Hive minds were a stupid decision. Oh hey, Stellaris is a pretty shallow game. Our mid-game's real rocky right now, and we're getting a lot of complaints about that. What should we add to the game? I got it. What if we created Hive Mind? What it does is it takes a core feature, being factions, fucking gets rid of it. Why? 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 What fucking game designer goes down and goes, so we've spent months working on this thing, and it's a core mechanic to how expansion and governing your populace is supposed to work, and it's one of the ways in which the game is interesting. Let's fucking cut it if you play as this one species. Why? Why on earth would you do that? If you do that, penalize the species for not having that, or introduce something in substitute of that. But they didn't, so hive minds are just boring. All your populations are exactly the same. Like, even the Borg are kind of boring in that respect, and that's part of the narrative about the Borg. That's part of the narrative about hive minds and science fiction. That's the reason humans are so uncomfortable with them in science fiction and in different settings, is that it's reviling to us, because individualism and differences are exciting and interesting and dynamic, and if everything is the same and there's no friction, there's no competition, there's no innovation, there's no disassociation between political parties or ideologies or philosophies, then you can't have sine, cosine. You can't have an interesting connecting system of, oh my god, what is it called? It's a word it's talked a lot about in Marxism. It's when dialectic. You can't have an interesting dialectic. And if you can't have a dialectic, then you don't have a society. You have a inert state, and that's not fun. And then following up with, well, hive minds were a real boring time. Let's make machine empires. Let's make one the fucking Wally machine empire, which, fuck you. It's incredibly boring. And if you already knew, Paradox, you already knew that organizing individual pops on a planet is a massive pain in the ass, especially when the pops move around, and that sector AI can't handle that properly, and therefore normal AI can't handle that properly. Why the fuck would you introduce a species or a government type or a civ type that is built entirely around this mechanic that doesn't work properly? It doesn't feel like punching down, it's a stupid call. I don't mean to be mean or needlessly critical, but so many decisions in Stellaris' prolonged development process have just been like, rather than address outstanding issues, instead we're going to ignore core mechanics of the game, create exceptions to those rules, and then complain about how hard things are to balance because we fucked the fucking pooch here. We screwed the pooch on it. I mean, it's interesting and it's sexy and it sells, which as a game designer is important. As a company is very important. If people want to play Machine Empires, you find a fucking way to give them Machine Empires, because you need to keep selling DLC and new copies of the game to stay in business. I absolutely understand that. But if that were a small part of the DLC, a small part of the patch, and a larger lion's share of the patch was introducing more diplomatic interactions, more meaningful ways to trade, more meaningful ways to form alliances or non-aggression pacts or trade agreements, to share planetary systems, to better utilize having more than one type of species in one civilization, so that species self-assign to the tasks that they're best fit, or something to that extent. If you come up with helpful improvements to the crux of the game. The crux of the game, expand, you got that down. Expand, Stellaris did from day one phenomenally. Exploring was always fun, and there's DLC that really have improved and built upon that and reinforced that and made that fucking Gibraltar. Exploration in Stellaris, even when you know all the events, is still fun. Expansion, a little less so. But still picking the right worlds and weighing the pros and cons of, well, this is slightly bigger than this one, and this has this quality and this has this quality, and that's a little fun. But then you get to explore, expand. Oh my god, where are the fucking 4 E's? There's exterminate, 4X. Oh, it's X. Exploiting, you kind of do. You kind of exploit after you expand by building in star bases, filling up tiles on planets. It's okay, it's real repetitive, not that fun. And then exterminate. War is, in 2.0, addressed as being not as fun as it should have been. It's still not really all that fun. For exterminating your enemies to be fun, for expansion to be fun, it needs to have friction and conflict. You need to have meaningful, compelling interactions with other powers that make it difficult, that introduce challenge and obstacles that can be overcome, but aren't just, well, they have a plus 30% to their mineral and energy output, so haha, there, you have to overcome that. I don't know. Yeah, Crisis and Awakened Empires were more of a threat when they were introduced originally, but because of combat being reworked in 2.0, they're kind of duds now. Absolutely. The way that things interact based on their... This is a terrible thing to open while talking about this. Direct democracies actually do have a different priority than technocratic dictatorships, etc., 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 which their personalities are defined as a combination of their starting traits and a random table that they roll on. I think there's a few different choices that they can have dependent on that, which is okay, but functionally, they don't act that differently. They all expand in more or less the same way. They still build ships in more or less the same way. Some are more likely to pick fights with others, but still the fights go more or less the same way. They don't politic with each other. They don't politic with the player. They do in a really shallow and meaningless way of like, we form a coalition. And then the coalition never expands or never goes anywhere, or like, we have a defensive pact, and then it never comes to a head. I don't know. It just could be so much better. Alright, we can have more pyramids. No. Yeah, we can. Cutting pyramids do more damage. Nanite pyramids are better at reinforcing. We can just build another cutting pyramid that'll get us up to our limit. If I throw in one more probe, that'll do. That'll do, Alex. That'll do. Once we get this fleet up to full, I will start another war. Even though we're going to have about an hour left, I think that's doable. We'll take out the Praeor here, maybe the Kravik if we have time. I've been playing Stellaris since 1.0. I've been playing it since literally the day it came out. So these judgments are not me going, I don't understand core game mechanics, or I don't understand how the game works. I very much understand how the game works. I'm very happy that war isn't just throwing Corvette spam at each other anymore, but the fact that war was ever the point where throwing Corvettes at each other in just increasingly massive numbers was an effective way to play, and that the AI didn't counter that build, speaks volumes about how the problem was not the Corvette spam, the problem was the fucking AI. If a player is intelligent enough to go, oh hey, I can counter this tactic in multiplayer if I see it coming, then the AI should be able to do the same thing. Or at least approximate that behavior. Because if they don't, then it's not a playing field. It's not a level playing field. It's just punching down. Punching down is not nearly as rewarding as punching up. People want to be the underdog. People want to overcome challenges, for the most part. People want to become the overdog eventually, but they want to earn that. You want to feel victorious in having achieved that, not meh about it. And early on, when people have just played a few games of Stellaris, absolutely, that's the prevailing feeling in theory, but as you get to know the game mechanics and what works and what doesn't work and what's optimal, what's suboptimal, etc., 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 that feeling evaporates. Like, my experience playing Stellaris and really playing most Paradox games is it's chasing the fucking dragon. It's trying to get back to that feeling of awe and immersiveness in being in a very complicated, overwhelming simulation that I felt like the game was when I first stepped into it. Whether it be Crusader Kings, Europa Universalis, Hearts of Iron, Stellaris, that feeling of, oh damn, this is so all-encompassing and takes so many smart things into consideration, is so clever and deep and interesting, but it doesn't go on forever, right? And it can't go on forever. That depth can't be infinitely deep. Even the ocean hits a limit eventually. Space doesn't, but whatever. The limits of human experience are finite, and a game can only be so deep and so complicated. Unless you're talking about Victoria 2, in which case it can be so complicated that because the guy who designed the AI and the production model left the company, that nobody else knows how it works, and it's so mystified that it's keeping you from making Victoria 3, which is all I really want from the company right now. The game is trying to chase that high, trying to chase that sense of excitement and exploration. And it's not this game alone, or even this company's games alone, that have that sort of thing. If you look at Dwarf Fortress communities and Dwarf Fortress players, they're very much the same way. RimWorld is very, very much caught up in that. RimWorld, however, has so much random bullshit that can happen that interact in such fantastic and weird ways that even if you have a pretty good idea what to do, it always plays out differently. And not plays out differently as in like I won in a different way, but there's complications that come up, and the game considers your wealth when considering what to throw against you. The game has a AI storyteller that, based on how well or how poorly you're doing, gives you more challenge or less challenge. The game plays with you. It's fun because it plays with you. A multiplayer game, whether it be a game where you're playing against AI nations or AI players, or a game where you're playing against other people, is fun because of that interplay. if it feels like the interplay is a one-way relationship, it's more of a drain than it is a satisfying experience. If I feel like all I'm getting from the AI are speed bumps, that's not enough. And oftentimes the other player in that situation, the human that you're playing with, is the game designer. The people who designed the game, designed the puzzles, designed the game mechanics, wrote the story, especially in single-player narrative games. Take The Legend of Zelda, for example, any of the fucking games in that series. It's an interaction between a human being and a human being by the medium of this video game, which is fascinating and exciting and meaningful. And Stellaris originally felt like it was trying to say something, trying to be something, trying to talk to its audience about space and exploration and the future and different anomalies and different kinds of planets and different kinds of species that might exist out there, and the weird ways that ideology can change, and what does it mean to be alien, and different ways to consider how the world around us is constructed and organized, and to question our underlying assumptions about how we assume things to be, how we assume a normal way to operate or organize a society is. It's about how different communities, different species, different ideologies, different religions, different whatever, come together and interact in a cosmic scale. Do they clash? Do they fight? Do they get along? Do they form communities? Do they destroy communities? That's compelling shit. I don't think Stellaris is about that anymore. Stellaris, increasingly, is about what EU4 is about. It's about gameplay more than message, and not deep gameplay, but shallow gameplay. It's about giving certain bonuses to certain types of nations, and giving a +1 whatever to this and a -1 whatever to that, and it's restricting geographic movement in the interest of making combat more interesting. And honestly, I'm sick and fucking tired of games solely about war. It is not at all fulfilling to continue to explore the idea of a concept that has been the decline and degradation of society for millennia. I do not want more games justifying and invigorating the spirit of warfare. I want stories about, and I want experiences about discovery and invention and trade and enlightenment and innovation. I want fucking EU4 to be a story, a game about the goddamn Renaissance and the Enlightenment. I want it to be about revolutionary periods in thought that have gone on to define human civilization for thousands of years afterward, well, hundreds of years afterward, that have been deep and meaningful and impactful and hugely influential on the ways that we now perceive the world and take the world for granted. I don't want a game about imperialism light. I don't want a game that you colonize North America, wiping out thousands of native individuals, and you just see numbers change values, that you just see a color wipe over a map. I don't want tales of diaspora of the slave trade from Africa just be reduced to a fucking province modifier. I don't want the shallowness that Paradox gives to the heart and soul of history, the human beings and the human stories and the social changes and evolution that have defined us and made us who we are. I don't love at all that the vast majority of attention goes to warfare, because Fallout is right, war never changes, and it doesn't get more interesting. The way we fight our wars changes, sure, but why we fight and how we fight and the stories we tell ourselves about fighting have been the same goddamn thing for tens of thousands of years. So I don't want more movies talking about war. I don't want more games talking about war. I want movies and games and intellectual properties that explore the consequences of war, that explain and explore the things we do despite how terrible we are to each other. not the ways that we're terrible to each other. I don't want to imagine a future where we go to space and blow shit up. I don't want to imagine a future where genocide is normalized and mass extinction of other species is something turned into a meme and a joke. I want the future to be a hopeful place, or at least a compelling place. Something to think about, something to talk about, something to aspire to, or be mindful of. I don't want it to be stylized as early Enlightenment warfare in space, with battleships instead of artillery, and destroyers instead of cavalry, and corvettes instead of infantry. And I don't want it to instead emulate World War II naval combat, which, to be fair, Paradox hasn't done very well in their World War II game either. They're working on it, but Hearts of Iron is a great fucking missed opportunity. You know what made World War II interesting? The human cost. When the human cost is a fucking meter that sits up here that just is manpower and goes up or down depending on what you do. And the worst consequence of having hundreds of millions of your own people die is just that you have to go on the defensive and play turtly and let the enemies kill themselves at you. You're not really exploring the impactful way that the period of time was a conflict between different ideologies about what a good world looked like, what dream humanity should embrace for the 21st century, what envisionment of our future was best. Do we crush each other into the sand and the mud because we find ourselves genetically superior to each other? Do we form workers' utopias despite the people who might resist it? That the blood and bones of the workers should go on to fuel the machine? Or do we embrace capitalism and decide that individual exceptionalism and the lie that everyone can be wealthy and everyone can be successful should be the way that the world is ruled? A story about World War II. World War II is gripping and meaningful because we were all bastards to each other. There were atrocities on every side. Now, of course, the Soviets, the Japanese, and the Germans just killed way more people than anyone else in way more industrialized and efficient ways that have never been a thing until that period of history, though the Turkish do come close. That we remember World War II because we don't want another World War II. It's an important lesson because of the impacts it had on families and individuals and societies. No, we would have had communism without the chaos, without the fall of Russia. It would have taken a while, but there were already communist movements in France and Germany and Italy and all over the United States. If it hadn't been for the Soviet Union, it would have happened anywhere. Communism was an inevitability of certain ideologies, the growing wealth discrepancy between the working class and the ruling class, which in the United States is why we're seeing an increase in the appeal of socialism now as we're getting further away from the end of the Cold War. Communism to me seems like an inevitable consequence of capitalism, an inevitable response to capitalism, and I think fascism is a necessary consequence of that as well. Fascism takes this idea of procurement of wealth and exceptionalism to even the complete opposite direction, and like, yeah, okay, we're centralizing everything and taking it all over, but it's for the good of the people, but we know better than the people because we're better than the people because our people are better than those other people. Yeah. Leninism and Stalinism, I mean, it all goes back to Marx, and Marx wasn't even the first one to be espousing socialist or proletarian or communist communist beliefs. He was a thinker among thinkers and a very prolific writer, a very well written and verbose individual. But even if Marx had been taken out, I think that the idea was palpable enough in enough people's minds that it might be called something else. But I feel like Marxism was a result of the material conditions of that period of history more than the individual genius of one person. and I believe that because I'm a historical materialist, because I'm a Marxist. Historical materialism is the belief that all historical events happen because of the conditions that material exists in. The concentration of wealth in certain hands, the production of that wealth, the distribution of that wealth, and not just like wealth is in terms of money, but like mineral resources, who has food, who has water, who has access to arable land, who can reproduce, who can't reproduce, who has autonomy, who doesn't have autonomy. Material conditions define and it is so hot in this room, my brain is frying. Inform is the word I want. They inform the world that people experience around them and the way that they react to that. I'm not determinist, but I mean, if everything else is the same, people are, it doesn't matter whose name we ascribe a movement to, the movement was gonna happen, right? Like, if George Washington hadn't been alive, we still would have had an American Revolutionary War. If Benjamin Franklin hadn't been alive, probably would have gone very differently, but we still would have had an American Revolutionary War, if, etc., etc., etc. If Hitler had died, there still would have been a fascist movement in Germany. Probably not as extreme, still would have been a thing. Anywho, this has been Alex rambling over Stellaris for, what, like 40 minutes now? There's gonna be another hour of this. This is part of why I'm like, I can't play the Borg, because they're too easy, and if they're too easy, and the game isn't complicated enough, and not engaging enough, or difficult enough, I'm just gonna start talking politics, and history, and game design, which are all things I care about greatly, but has nothing to do with what's going on. So, YouTube, comment, what are you thinking? Want to jump the boat? Want to move on to something else? Or want to double down on this? Either way, I'm good with it. Thanks for hanging out. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.